Hello, everyone, and welcome to Health Reform Beyond the Basics. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is Boosting Enrollment Among People Who Are Immigrants and Their Families, Outreach and Application for Process Considerations. My name is Ayesat Odiale, and I'm the Health Projects Assistant at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, which we are presenting in partnership with the National Immigration Law Center. Beyond the Basics is a project of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. It's designed to provide training and resources to facilitate enrollment in the ACA, health insurance marketplaces, and Medicaid. The Center is a nonprofit policy organization. We are not a part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Beyond the Basics is aimed at healthcare assisters, advocates, state and local officials, and others who help people get and keep their health coverage. This session is not intended for press purposes, and we are not able to offer continuing education credit for our webinars at this time. Webinar logistics. So automated captions have been enabled for this webinar. To view them, you can click on the double CC icon at the bottom of your screen, or you can click on the More option with 3 dots at the bottom of your screen, and there you should have the option to turn on closed captioning. All participants are muted and in listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question, you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your webinar screen and type your answer into the box. We will be monitoring questions and we'll pause for Q&A during the presentation. We may not be able to answer every single question asked, but we will have a record of all of your questions and we'll use it as a guide for future resources and presentations. And of course, you can email your questions after the webinar to beyondthebasics@cbpp.org. And just a quick reminder that you won't be able to click on your screen to go to any of the links shared, but I will add the slide deck in the chat with all of the active links so you can view those there. And after today's webinar, as always, we will send an email recording of the presentation along with links to the slides and other resources. And we will post everything to the Beyond the Basics website. Here you can see the webinar schedule. We are hosting a combination of traditional webinars and new office hour sessions. For some topics, not a lot has changed since last year, so we're offering office hours to give you a quick refresher and answer your questions, but you can always refer to our webinar archive for in-depth webinars on these topics. That includes households and income, the premium tax credit, plan design and plan comparison, and the annual re-enrollment process for the marketplace. We are offering full-length webinars on topics where there is new information to share or where we typically get a lot of questions, including eligibility, outreach, and application issues for people who are immigrants, and resolving data matching issues. And we are glad to introduce 2 new webinars, What's New for 2025, which will be delivered in both English and Spanish. And last but not least, for the first time, we'll be hosting an enrollment trivia challenge to round out the series. This is a quiz show for both new and seasoned assisters to put your eligibility and enrollment skills to the test. Today's webinar will cover public charge, navigating the application process, a new HHS rule that ends bar on marketplace eligibility for people with DACA and others, and unauthorized agent and broker activity on ACA Marketplace. Today's presenters are Shelby Gonzales, Vice President of Immigration Policy at CBPP, and Gabrielle Lessard, Senior Policy Counsel from the National Immigration Law Center. Gabrielle specializes in the laws and policies affecting access to healthcare for low-income immigrants and their families. So now I will pass it over to Gabrielle to get us started.
Thanks, Ayesat. Let's go to the next slide. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon. So we're going to start by talking about some issues that can deter people from enrolling in healthcare or other benefit programs. The first one is public charge. So under immigration law, Certain people undergo an assessment at 2 points in their immigration journey. When they apply to become lawful permanent residents, which is also called getting a green card, or when they are outside the country seeking a visa to come to the United States. This is a public charge assessment looking at whether at some point in the future that person is likely to become primarily dependent on the government for subsistence. And that is defined as you being dependent on one of two kinds of public benefits. The first is public cash assistance for income maintenance, and the second is long-term institutional care that's paid for by the government, such as a person in a nursing home that's being paid by Medicaid. These are the only kinds of benefits that could be negatively factored into the public charge test, and no other benefit is negatively factored, including ACA marketplace subsidies and CHIP or Medicaid, as long as they're not being used for long-term care. There's a link to the regulations at the bottom of the slide, and they're very comprehensive. Next slide. So just diving in a little bit more, long-term institutionalization at the government's expense it's residential. It does not include home and community-based services. It also does not include short-term institutionalization for rehabilitation purposes, such as a person leaving the hospital and going into a step-down unit for further care. People who are in prison or otherwise convicted of a crime and not in the community are also not considered to be institutionalized for public charge purposes. One positive development in the current regulations is that they clarify that the receipt of benefits only counts when the person who is seeking the immigration status or visa was the beneficiary of the benefits. In the past, there were issues about child-only TANF benefits being attributed to their parents. That can no longer happen. Very important to know that many categories of immigrants are exempt from public charge. Public charge primarily affects family-based immigration. So the exempt categories, which are all detailed in the regulations, include people granted asylum, refugees, people who are applying for or who have U visas for people who are victims of serious crimes, or T visas for people who are victims of human trafficking and their dependents, people who are self-petitioning under the Violence Against Women Act, that is available to people of any gender, and then people who are seeking or granted special immigrant juvenile status, which is a status that leads to permanent status granted to children and youth who have had to seek the protections of the juvenile court because of parental abuse or abandonment. Important to know, another clarification in the most recent regulations is that benefits a person received while they were in an exempt status are not considered in the public charge test. So if, for example, if someone was getting refugee cash assistance and then they later applied to adjust to become a lawful permanent resident, that cash assistance could not be considered. Next slide. Now, as an assister, you can help people understand what this rule is and is not, and help them feel reassured about their ability to seek health care without consequences. We do know that many people have foregone health coverage and other supports because of the fear and confusion that they have faced related to public charge, particularly during the previous administration. And again, enrollment assisters can play an important role in helping people understand the rule, and that participation in health insurance affordability programs is not negatively factored except for the narrow use of long-term care. And then enrollment assisters can share resources, provide information about the importance of getting comprehensive insurance, as well as providing information about privacy protections that I'll talk about on the next slide. For more information, I would refer you to resources developed by the Protecting Immigrant Families campaign. The first one, keepyourbenefits.org, is an interactive website that enables people to determine whether they are exempt from public charge and whether any benefits that they are considering applying for it would potentially be considered in the public charge assessment. The second is a community outreach flyer that is available in 10 languages that details the current rule. Next slide. And then a second set of concerns that I wanted to talk about are related to privacy. People have a lot of fear that they're sharing information with the government. And so they're concerned that applying for health coverage, even if they're applying for a citizen child or another citizen family member, could expose the fact that there are non-citizens in the household. There are privacy rules in federal law and most state laws that protect people who are applying for health insurance, including the people whose families have mixed immigration status. When people are applying for coverage for someone else in their household, like a child, they do not have to provide information about their own immigration status. And then, sorry, the statutes for the ACA marketplaces, Medicaid, and CHIP limit the use of information that is collected during the application process. It can only be used to make eligibility determinations and has to be protected from unauthorized disclosure. State workers, marketplace employees, and assister groups are explicitly required by law and regulations to keep that information private and secure. And for more information, you can see this resource from NILC. And I will turn it back over to Shelby at this point.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. I'm going to walk us through some parts of the application that are very relevant to people who are immigrants, who are going through and seeing if they're eligible. So next slide, please. So first, as you know, in order to enroll in coverage in the marketplace, an individual has to either meet a citizenship or a lawfully present immigration requirement. So you need to have one of those. And that status does need to be verified in order for you to purchase insurance in the ACA marketplaces, with a couple of exceptions in states that have expanded, well, one exception in Washington so far, that has allowed people to purchase insurance regardless of their status. But in the vast majority of cases, you need to have a lawfully present immigration status that's been verified. And the way that the application works is that if an individual is a US citizen, they provide a social security number, and that number is checked against records in the Social Security Administration. And if a person is an immigrant, in general, they would just provide some document numbers from the different immigration documents that they have. And that information is checked against the Department of Homeland Security's SAFE system. So those numbers are, and other factors that are provided in the application about the individual is then utilized to verify information that's in those records. Next slide, please. So if I am in the application and I indicate that I am a US citizen, the kind of flow that you would see happen is that the individual would be asked if they are a US citizen or national. And if they say yes, then healthcare.gov uses the social security number that was provided for that applicant. And then they check it against information that's available through the Social Security Administration. Now, this is not a perfect system. There might be some individuals who are US citizens, but they cannot get their status verified electronically through the Social Security Administration. And one group in particular that this may happen to, although it's not the only group, are people who are either naturalized or derived US citizens. And if that happens, the next question that's going to be asked of the individual is that, are you a naturalized or derived citizen? And if that's the case, then they'll be asked to provide numbers that are available to that individual on either their naturalization certificate or their certificate of citizenship. And healthcare.gov and or other state-based marketplaces will then try to use that information to verify against the SAVE system, the systemic alien verification for entitlement system that I mentioned before, that's run by the Department of Homeland Security. Again, this is not the full universe of people who might not be able to be verified electronically, and electronic data matching is imperfect. So there might still be people who still run into some barriers. Next slide, please. So when that happens, and an individual can't have their citizenship verified in real time as somebody's going through the application, an individual will be will be told you can enroll in coverage, but we're gonna there's a data matching issue that needs to be resolved, and you need to provide us some documentation about your citizenship. And that individual can provide any of these documents, like a U.S. passport and others that are listed here, without any other documents. And so it could be just that document could be uploaded to their application, and that would be sufficient to prove citizenship. They do not have one of these documents, which is the case for a lot of people, then they might have to provide more than one document. In the next slide, we'll go through some of those. Next slide, please. So if those other documents aren't available, then the individual would have to provide one document that is on the left side of this table. So things like a U.S. Public birth certificate or consular's report of birth abroad, any of these documents on the left, you have to have one of those. And you need to have another document that is on the right side. So things like a driver's license or something that proves your identity. So in the case you don't have one of the documents in the prior slide, then you need two. You need something that proves citizenship and something that proves identity. Next slide, please. So what happens if you say you're not a citizen? So that you got the first question and you say, no, I'm not a US citizen. Then the individual is going to be asked if you have an eligible immigration status. And they have a link to what that means, right? Because people generally do not know what an eligible immigration status, status is. So they provide a link, and the person can look at that vast long list of different statuses. And then if the person says yes, then they are going to be asked to select a document type that corresponds with the individual's status. So then that, they click on one of these statuses below, and then specific document numbers will be asked for the individual to provide from those, the document that they've selected. Next slide, please. So what does that look like? For example, the permanent resident card, which is one that you're going to see a lot of for people who are lawful permanent residents, the I-551, they generally will be asked to provide their US CIS registration number and their card number. Note that older versions of these cards might not say USCIS, they might say alien numbers, not terminology that's utilized anymore, but in older documents that might be what you see. Here's other examples of other documents that individuals might be asked to provide, and then what the corresponding numbers are that they will be asked to provide. Next slide, please. And we just have some additional ones here. And we also provide a link to different documents used to verify immigration status, so that, I really don't think anybody should try and memorize any of this. One, the individual is going to select their the kind of document they have. Specific numbers will be asked based off of what their selection was. This reference guide, I think, would be really helpful to you to have handy, because it is not always really clear to look at and find what numbers, when they say things like USCIS registration number, card number, or those kinds of numbers, they're not always labeled super clearly. There's different iterations of these documents that can make it, pretty confusing to figure out what numbers you're looking at. And we know that getting it right really matters, right? Because the more precise you are in helping the person identify what those numbers are and inputting them into the documents, the higher likelihood that they will not have a data matching issue. And data matching issues can be challenging to overcome. So definitely recommend having that guide available to you as you're going through the process. Next slide, please. We provide some kind of tips here. And, as I mentioned before, there's different iterations of numbers. They might ask for different things. The older numbers might not, they might not have the same number of digits that are now being requested. So there's different nuanced information that you're going to want to look at. So we really, again, just really recommend utilizing the resources that we provided in our documents and resources and Beyond the Basics, and healthcare.gov also provides some document. You have to go through a few links, through what healthcare.gov provides, but you also can access different guides to these documents that can really help you out as you're going through them. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, a couple things. You both want to make sure that you do everything you can to help people get a real-time verification of the eligibility status so that they don't have a data matching issue. If an individual does have a data matching issue, it does not mean that generally that the person can't enroll, doesn't mean that they can't get premium tax credits as they are going through the process of sending in documents or uploading documents and getting all of the information reviewed and verified through the relevant agencies that do the verification. However, so generally we have this 90-day period, 95-day period actually on immigration documents and citizenship documents. So in general, people can get benefits during this time. There are certain folks that will be allowed to purchase insurance in the marketplace in some cases, or sometimes they're sent to Medicaid erroneously if they have a data matching issue. It becomes a little tricky when a data matching issue happens, when there's an individual who has a lawfully present immigration status. So that means that they are eligible to purchase coverage in the marketplace, but they're ineligible for Medicaid because Medicaid has very restrictive eligibility requirements based off of immigration status, right? So there are some folks that even if their income is below the poverty line, they still qualify for premium tax credits if they are lawfully present, they have a lawfully present status, but they're ineligible for Medicaid due to their immigration status. The problem is that if the computer doesn't know that, they basically will treat the individual as if they're fully eligible for Medicaid based off of their immigration status. They're just going to make that assumption. That's what that computer does because computers are imperfect, right? So that's where it really, really, really matters if an individual is getting help or not by somebody who understands what's going on. So that's why I'm going to say a lot of words. There's a lot of words on these slides. And I am doing it because without this kind of background knowledge, it becomes very challenging for people who have a data matching issue and have income that either makes them look like they're eligible for Medicaid, or that makes, or their income is below the poverty line, and this is what happens. Okay. So, if healthcare.gov can electronically verify the individual's immigration status through SAVE in real time, they're either going to be sent to Medicaid. So if that person looks like they're otherwise eligible, let's say their income is, they're in a state that has expanded Medicaid, the vast majority of states have, and their income is below 138% of the federal poverty line. The computer is going to say, we're going to assume you are fully eligible for Medicaid based on immigration status until we're told otherwise, right? Until we've verified until your immigration status has been verified. So the computer is going to say, we're going to send this person to Medicaid, and Medicaid will then have to figure out whether or not this person's eligible based off their immigration status. Okay. Or if the person has income below 100% of the federal poverty line and is not otherwise eligible for Medicaid. So in other words, in the few states, the handful, too many states, unfortunately, because one would be too many, but in the states that still have a coverage gap, who still don't have not expanded Medicaid, in that case, the income is below 100% of the poverty line. The computer is going to say, oh, you're in the coverage gap. So they're going to tell that person, you can enroll in marketplace coverage at full price. There's not going to be any kind of PTC or cost sharing reduction for you. And the person's going to be asked to provide proof of their immigration status. Okay. Next slide, please. So how would this work, right? What steps would have to happen to make it so the person would get the correct eligibility determination? Okay, so the marketplace assesses or determines that an individual is eligible for Medicaid. In the case that, the first example that I gave earlier, this person looks like they might be eligible for Medicaid based off of their income and other factors. The only thing that we don't know yet is if they meet the immigration requirement. So the case is sent to Medicaid agency for further eligibility review, including verification of immigration status. The Medicaid agency then notifies the applicant that proof is needed. And it's not limited to immigration status. They might even be asking for income and other information too, right? And if the applicant sends in that information, and that's a big if, right? But if say that they do, right, that they understood the documents that were provided to them, they understood that there was a whole shift from they went to healthcare.gov and they got sent to this Medicaid agency. Like, that's confusing already. Like, they got the information maybe only in English. Of course, we hope that they get it in a different language that is relevant to what they've asked for, but we don't know. And these notices sometimes are confusing. So now we're in the predicament that the agency notifies the applicant proof is needed. We say now that the applicant fully understood this and sends in the information, some proof of their immigration status. And now the Medicaid agency looks at and reviews that information, that documentation, and then says, oh, you're not eligible for Medicaid based off of your immigration status. You have been denied Medicaid. In theory, then the case should be referred back to the marketplace, but we live in an imperfect world. And unfortunately, that may not happen, right? Like that the case may not be referred back to the marketplace. Let's assume that it was. The marketplace would then notify the applicant to come back to the marketplace and would provide them some instructions to get the correct eligibility determination. I'll show you what those steps will be in the next slide. Then the applicant returns to the marketplace, indicates that they've been denied Medicaid based off of their immigration status and provides any other additional information that's needed to establish eligibility. So all of those things have to happen. And you can imagine things can break down at any one of these points. And that's not easy, right? So again, best case scenario is you do everything, everybody does what they need to do, and all the information works, and you don't have a data matching issue. And even when you do provide all the information, it's perfect. Sometimes there are certain folks that are still going to get a data matching issue because, again, systems are not perfect. So just know that this is hard, but yet so important to be able to help people through this very complex process. Next slide, please. So what would happen for the individual that gets sent back to the marketplace? They can indicate that they've been denied Medicaid based off of their immigration status, and by answering these questions. Now, you will note that these questions are going to ask about, whether or not somebody has been previously denied eligibility based off of their immigration status. And, if you are working with somebody and for a fact that this is an individual, they could just be like, hey, we just got denied Medicaid for based on our immigration status. Here's our notice. Or like maybe you worked with them before, or for sure that this is an individual who has been denied. That it's okay to truthfully answer these questions to get the correct eligibility determination, even if you aren't the one who helped them through the marketplace application and had them go back to the marketplace and then come back. So these are the questions that would come up for the individual, and then if it's super important for you to really exercise caution in answering all these questions. But these are the questions that would come up for the individual and that you would have to answer honestly with them, help them answer those questions so that they can get the correct eligibility determination on PTCs and cost sharing reductions. Next slide, please. So let's say that what happens in theory when an individual is treated as if they were in the coverage gap. So these are the people who have income below the federal poverty line. They otherwise, the computer thinks that they would be eligible for Medicaid based off of immigration status, but but they're not, right? Because because the state has not expanded Medicaid, right? So the marketplace determines that the applicant can enroll in coverage without premium tax credits and notifies the applicant that they may qualify for help for paying for coverage, but that proof of status is needed to make that determination. And then when the individual submits their documents, then that is sent to a special unit at the marketplace, and they will make the determination. They will take the steps needed to get the verification done. And then once that's happened, if the person's determined to be ineligible for Medicaid based off of their immigration status, the marketplace then notifies the applicant of eligibility for subsidies and special enrollment periods that's applicable. And then the applicant returns to the marketplace to select the plan with PTCs and CSRs. And they will be granted a SAP to enroll as applicable. So if they somehow, because this process takes longer, and now they're outside of the open enrollment period, then they would be able to use an SAP as applicable. Next slide, please. Wait, did we miss a slide? I just want to make sure that we didn't miss a slide. Oh, no. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Aisette. And I'm going to turn it over to Gabrielle, back over to Gabrielle for this slide.
Thanks, Shelby. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so when DACA, you all know what DACA is, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, protection from deportation and employment authorization for certain people who came to U.S. as children. When DACA was created in 2012, We thought that DACA recipients would be eligible for the marketplace because everybody else with deferred action was eligible for the marketplace. But the regulations that define lawfully present for marketplace purposes were amended to explicitly exclude DACA recipients. So after many years of advocacy for many people, effective November 1st of this year, that exclusion is going to be eliminated from the regulations, and people who were granted DACA will be able to apply for marketplace coverage. The regulations also provided a number of simplifications and clarifications in eligibility for some statuses that were already listed in the lawfully present standards. One is that the regulations previously listed as lawfully present people applying for special immigrant juvenile status, but because they predated the USCIS backlogs and people who got special immigrant juvenile status, which we call SIGIS, would become lawful permanent residents right away at that time. They didn't have a period of time in SIGIS status. Now it can take a couple of years, and the regulations finally clarify that people are, of course, lawfully present during that time period. Another provision in the regulations that will help vulnerable children is that under the current rules, children under 14 who are applying for asylum, withholding of removal, which is a form of relief for people who can't safely return to their home country, or relief under the Convention Against Torture, will no longer be subject to a 180-day waiting period before they're considered lawfully present and able to apply for coverage in the marketplace. And I should note that these changes also apply to basic health plan in the states that have it, which is New York and Minnesota. Non-immigrant visa holders, so people who have like temporary agricultural worker visas, seasonal worker visas, a number of different types of visas. Under the current regulations, the standard says that they have to be not in violation of status, which is not something that a healthcare enroller could generally assess. So that will be eliminated beginning November 1st. And then there were a number of questions in the Q&A about people who have employment authorization. There are, under the current regulations, a couple of categories of people with employment authorization who are not considered to be lawfully present for eligibility purposes. Those exceptions are eliminated, and now anybody who has an employment authorization document is considered lawfully present for marketplace and BHP purposes. Finally, people applying for adjustment to LPR status, that's again, lawful permanent resident or getting a green card. The current regulations provide that they need to have an approved visa petition, and that superfluous language has been eliminated. Now, important to know that even though these changes were originally proposed for the lawfully residing standard in Medicaid and CHIP in the states that have elected to cover children and pregnant individuals through that CHIP program, the changes were not yet adopted for those programs. So we'll have actually some differences in the definition of lawfully present or lawfully residing between Medicaid and CHIP and the marketplace and BHP. Next slide. So people who are newly eligible can get in most states, open enrollment starts November 1st, so this may not be very evident, but people who are newly eligible because of the change in the regulations will get a special enrollment period. It'll be 60 days. If they enroll in the first part of November, they'll be able to get coverage effective December 1st. Again, the proposed regulations would have also applied the changes to the Medicaid and CHIP lawfully residing standard, but that has not happened in the current regulations. People who meet the lawfully present standard but are ineligible for Medicaid due to their immigration status, as Shelby talked about, can go to the marketplace and should qualify for premium tax credits if they have a qualifying income, even if that income is below 100% of the federal poverty line. Now, anytime there is a change in eligibility, the rollout can be a little bumpy. So we need to be really attentive during this open enrollment period to filling out applications as completely and accurately as possible, but being aware and advising clients that they might get a data matching issue. If that happens and they're unable to be verified electronically, it'll be important to upload the required documents as quickly as possible. It is possible that people who have data matching issues could get the wrong eligibility results or be sent to Medicaid. Um, Shelby talked about some of the troubleshooting there. And then we have heard that some people might be more likely to experience delays in getting their electronic verification of status. So that might include people who have a pending application for adjustment to permanent resident status, people who are beneficiaries under family unity, which is an older law, so you are unlikely to see many of them, and then some people who have DACA. Next slide. Okay, one more. And then just one thing that we want to flag for you all today, because it is something that is happening that is specifically being targeted to immigrants, which is that the marketplaces are seeing increases in suspicious enrollment activity, including people being enrolled in plans or having their plans switched without their consent. And again, we've heard about people being targeted because they're immigrants or limited English proficient. If people find out that they were enrolled in a plan or had their plan switched without their authorization, they should call the marketplace call center as soon as possible. And the marketplace should be able to cancel the unauthorized plan, re-enroll people in the plans that they selected, may be able to help them with getting repayment of inaccurate costs that, that they had to pay, and getting corrections to their tax forms. And I think at this point we go to Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A box.
Yes, thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you, Shelby. We have a few questions that we have in the Q&A chat, so I'll just get started. The first question we have is, with the marketplace opening to DACA recipients, what can be said about public charge and DACA?
DACA recipients are not eligible for not exempt, sorry, from public charge. Remember that public charge is assessed when a person is applying for a visa. That doesn't apply to DACA recipients because they're here, or when they are applying to adjust to lawful permanent resident status. DACA does not grant people a pathway to adjust to LPR status, although they may get one through marriage or through some other basis. And their public charge assessment would be just like any other non-exempt individuals at that point.
Thank
I
you.
would also like to just add, Gabrielle, if you don't mind,
Sure.
that accessing marketplace coverage is not a negative factor under a public charge assessment. Accessing Medicaid and CHIP is also not a negative factor under a public charge assessment unless the Medicaid is paying for long-term care in an institution. And we're not talking about like a rehabilitation center for, a few months or whatever. We're talking about like somebody is now in, like this is where they're going to be living. This is like a nursing home type of situation, for lack of a better term. Hope that clarifies.
Next question is, what is the difference between certificate of naturalization and certificate of citizenship?
It's
So
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Shelby.
Go ahead, Gabrielle. It's okay.
So a certificate of naturalization is only available to naturalized citizens. A certificate of citizenship could be used by somebody who was US born or a derived citizen, as well as by a naturalized citizen.
Thank you. And so another question we have is, if they have a work permit letter, does this document make them eligible to apply?
If they have an employment authorization card or have employment authorization, that makes them eligible to. I'm not sure what a work permit letter is.
Yeah, so if the person who asked this question can rephrase it or add more context, so we can possibly get back to you after the webinar. Another question we have is, if someone is neither a resident or citizen but has social to work, can they apply for Marketplace?
This is another variation of the same question, which is, again, if they have an employment authorization document, which I think is what the person means by social to work, then they are eligible for the Marketplace as of November 1st.
Thank you. Another question we have is prenatal Medicaid for undocumented women considered public charge?
No, the only kind of health care that is considered as a negative factor in the public charge assessment is institutionalization for long-term care.
You. And we have another question. What does it mean that children applying for asylum doesn't have to wait for the 180-day period?
So go ahead, Shelby.
Go ahead. It's
We're
fine.
stepping on each other here. So under the current regulations, adults applying for asylum are required to have employment authorization, and that will not change with the new regulations. But because children under 14 are too young to get employment authorization, at the time the regulations were drafted up, HHS felt like it was, I don't know, fair to make the children wait for 6 months before they were eligible to apply as well, to establish some kind of parity. And this is, well, I'll try to refrain from my editorial comments, but as of November 1st, these vulnerable children will be able to apply for Marketplace coverage as soon as they apply for asylum, withholding or protection under the Convention Against Torture.
Thank you. Another question we have here is, for DACA recipients who are children or don't have an EAD, is the I-797 Notice of Action form the correct info for the Marketplace application?
Yes.
Awesome. And Gabrielle and Shelby, please feel free to raise any questions in the Q&A chat that you would like to answer live.
Okay. One question that I see is, if somebody's coming to the US as a tourist for 6 months, can they be eligible for the Marketplace? And Marketplace eligibility requires that the person be able to establish residency in their state. Generally, sorry, my cat wants to show me his toy. Generally, a person who comes on a tourist visa and intends to remain in compliance with the terms of that visa will not be able to establish residency.
And another question in the chat or in the Q&A is also, is overseas income included? What proof needs to be submitted in this regard? And the answer is that all taxable income needs to be included in the application. And that is, it could either be provided as proof as, in the fact that it's part of your taxable income, right? That this is a line that's in your taxable income. So there may not be like a need to provide that specific, piece of income within, if your tax, your whole tax document already provides it. There are also, there's also opportunities to provide things like self-attestation if you need to, but I don't necessarily see how that would be a need if it's income that's going to be already available in your taxes.
Thank you. And we have another question that says, for non-expansion states, since a lawfully present immigrant does not qualify for Medicaid by default, do you still need to get a written Medicaid denial before completing the marketplace application? Or can you just answer denied Medicaid due to immigration status?
I'm so sorry. I said, can you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. For non-expansion states, since a lawfully present immigrant does not qualify for Medicaid by default, do you still need to get a written Medicaid denial before completing the marketplace application? Or can you just answer denied Medicaid due to immigration status?
For individuals who are in that situation, they're not the example of an individual that gets sent to Medicaid to get denied before they come back. The marketplace would treat them as if they're in the coverage gap. So unless that individual had already gone to Medicaid for some other reason, and that they've gotten denied before based off of their immigration status, then they can't truthfully answer that they've been denied Medicaid based off of their immigration status. So there's a different process for individuals who are in a coverage gap state. They've been they basically need to get the marketplace to prove that they're ineligible for Medicaid based off of their immigration status. And the way that they do that is they have to take the steps that the marketplace will ask of them to provide evidence of their immigration status, overcome that data matching issue, and then the marketplace will be able to make that determination that they are ineligible for Medicaid based off their immigration status.
Okay, thank you both. So I think we can move on from the Q&A section. Here are the resources from Beyond the Basics and NILC, plus a few others from today's presentation. Upcoming webinars. Our next webinar will be Preventing and Resolving Data Matching Issues, which is next Tuesday, October 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register for this and other upcoming webinars on the Beyond the Basics website under upcoming webinars. And as a reminder, we will be distributing the materials from today's session via email, and we will post everything to the website. Here you can reach out to Shelby or Gabrielle, or if you have any questions or need assistance, you can reach out to the Beyond the Basics contact email. Thank you so much, Shelby and Gabrielle, and thank you to those who joined and asked questions. With that, I will bring this webinar to a close.